Usually, painting ordnance is an easy and straightforward process, but these JDAMS are going to be a challenge. It's the Joint Direct Attack Munition, and it consists of a tail assembly and a guidance package bolted to the outside of a standard gravity bomb. So the challenge is to paint the bomb itself olive drab while the components remain gray. I masked off and spray painted the stone gray onto the tail fin assembly, but the guidance package, I don't know how I'm going to do it. So far I've left it in the original plastic gray. What I think I'm going to do is mix some acrylic homemade olive drab and try to apply it as a wash to these areas in between the guidance components. And then I'm going to apply it to this nose section and hopefully keep it from getting onto the guidance package along this edge. This portion here, I may just leave it alone. I don't know how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to mix up a batch of homemade olive drab and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I'm ready to mix my homemade olive drab. I got my 4 colors that I think I'm going to need here. I'm going to start with some of this acrylic Spanish olive I got from Michael's. And I'll just put a couple drops, maybe 4 drops, and see how that goes. I'm going to throw in a little bit of this graphite. Maybe 1 drop of that for now. And then 1 drop of this raw sienna, which I use as a rust wash. And then we'll just mix it. And I think I'm liking this. Wow, first try. Here it is for the camera. Maybe it can be a little darker, a little more brown. Maybe, I think darker. Should be darker. Okay. Another drop of this dark gray. Okay. I think that's close enough for this project. I'm not going for complete accuracy here, just fast and easy. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of water and get it thinned out a little bit, and then we'll see how this goes. It's my first time doing this, so I'm really just shooting in the dark here. Alright, let me get some off the brush. You know what? Yeah, we'll get some off. And just apply a little bit of it, see what it looks like. I'll try with the front first. Yeah, I'm not liking this. It looks like avocado guacamole. It's not really olive. But it's not that bad either. I'm committed. I'm gonna stick with this for now. It needs to be thinner though. It's not gonna flow very well, but this part of it doesn't matter, so I'm just gonna finish this part. I did not really pay any attention to the seam lines on this. On Ordnance, I usually, for whatever reason, laziness, I don't usually work on the seam lines too much with Ordnance. A little bit of basic sanding to get the worst of it, but that's about it. Okay. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll hit the edges with a thin wash in a little bit. Okay. It's going to need another coat anyways. Okay, so let's add a little water and see what happens in between the components. Start with this large section. Still not flowing, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. I'm trying to hit a sweet spot where it flows, but it's not super watery. Still not there, but it's close. Yeah, a little bit more water. Okay. Still not really a wash, but it is pretty thin. Okay, I'm going to play with this some more off camera and see what I can get, and then we'll see the results. The painting of the Ordnance is complete. I did it with hand brush acrylics and rattle can spray paints. On the JDAMS, the gray guidance package components stand out pretty nicely against the olive drab bomb casing, so I'm pretty happy with that result. The Mark 83 1,000 pounders also came out pretty good. The handmade acrylic looked too light while it was going on, but as it dried it got darker, and now the tone is pretty close to what I want, so I'm happy with that result as well. The AMRAMs were done with rattle can spray paints and masking. The dark gray portion has the frosty surface finish that I experienced when I was painting the fuselage, but I got it pretty smoothened out with some sandpaper and flat clear. The front of the Sidewinder was done with hand brushed graphite acrylic, and the main portion is white primer from the spray can. Now that the bombs and missiles are painted, the next step is to do the stripes. Like wheels and canopies, this is one of those small details that I have always struggled with. And judging from the online model building community, I'm not alone. As you might guess, there are several methods that give great results, but involve a lot of skill and hard work to pull off. But like engine nozzles, it's one of those small details that really make a model pop, in my opinion. For straight-sided shapes like most missiles, the masking is quite straightforward. And if you have an airbrush, masking and airbrushing is probably the best option. For this build, I don't have rattle cans or acrylics in the colors I want, so I have to think of another way. I'll get back to that soon. The masking gets much more difficult for tapered shapes like bomb noses. In previous builds, I used small rubber bands for dental braces with my airbrush, and it worked really well, although it was a lot of work. Without an airbrush, I couldn't find any good options online, but I did come up with an idea that might work. In the sheet metal industry, they start with a metal sheet of a certain shape called a flat pattern to bend and form various shapes. It turns out that the tapered nose of a bomb is sort of like a cone. The flat pattern for a cone is a disc with a pie slice wedge removed. If you cut out the center, you can get a cone segment that might work as a stripe for the bomb nose. I found a handy online calculator to get the basic size and shape for the cone's flat pattern. I'll put the link in the description. From the inner and outer diameters and the desired cone height, it gives you the info to draw the flat pattern. I will draw this flat pattern on colored masking tape I got from Walmart for $7. Then I will cut it out and stick it on the bomb. For the Mark 83 1,000 pounders, I want to start near the very front and go back around the 10th. By the way, my numbers are in inches unless stated otherwise. The bomb diameter at the front is around 0.11, and at the back it's around 0.16. Plugging these numbers into the calculator gives a big radius of 0.36 and a small radius of 0.25 with an included angle of 80 degrees. I'm going to try this on paper first and see if it's close. Using the numbers provided by the calculator, I'm going to draw the circles using the closest I can find on my circle template. So the big diameter is going to be 3/4, and the small diameter is going to be 1/2 inch. I traced those out on a piece of paper and cut it out with some scissors, and I ended up with this shape. So now I'm going to wrap it around the bomb and we'll see how it fits. So I'm just going to place it up against here, wrap it around, and I don't know if you can see it here, but it looks like the fit is okay. So the next step is to try it with some tape, and we'll see how it turns out. These stripes on the Ordnance are complete. Here's the yellow tip of the Mark 83 1,000 pounder. Here's the yellow stripe on the front of the JDAM. Here's some stripes on the AMRAAM missile. Since the missiles have straight sides, I didn't have to do any cone flat patterns. Just cut thin strips of tape and applied them. Here's the sidewinder. So from far away, these stripes look okay. Up close, they look kind of amateurish. However, due to the ease of this process, I think it might be suitable for those that don't have an airbrush or beginners who just want to get stripes on there as quickly and easily as possible. If you want to get serious about model building, I think the best advice I can give at this point is to get an airbrush and go through one of the more labor-intensive methods that you can find online. I'll probably go into one or two of those methods in future builds. For now, all I have left to do is to weather the bombs. If you look at photos of bombs on the internet, most of them are pretty dirty and rusty. So I'm going to try to apply that look to it, and then I'll be ready to put the fins on the JDAMS and do the final attachment to the plane. This completes the build of Top Gun Maverick's FA-18 Super Hornet. My goal was to use cheap and easy to get tools and very simple techniques to construct a nice looking model in a way that a beginner can realistically accomplish. Although I don't recommend these tools and methods for serious model building, I think they worked well enough to be useful for new model builders on their first build or two. My goal was to show first-time builders that they can get pretty good results with very basic tools and skills. I think the number one advice I would give new model builders is to just give it a try and not expect excellence on the first few builds. Maybe try some of the methods I showed in these videos, or maybe try other methods. Either way, experiment and improvise, find out what works for you, learn from your successes and your mistakes, try not to stress out, and just have fun. Get more advanced tools and learn more advanced techniques as your interest, experience, and budget grow. Here's a summary of the tools and techniques I used for this build and what I learned during this build. The super glue with the precision applicator was very good. I give this an 8 out of 10, and I'll be using it on future builds when I think it will set quicker and easier than the Tamiya Extra Thin. The pocket knife just wasn't sharp enough, and I give it a 4. Amazon has a huge selection of cheap, X-Acto type hobby knives for less than $10, which would work way better. The emery boards were very useful and get an 8. The main drawback is you can't get into tight spots with these. For tight spots, a set of needle files comes in very handy. The DAP Dry Dex is a 6. It's very easy to use and it works pretty well for filling small gaps, but it doesn't sand well and it doesn't work well for correcting offset seam surfaces. For future builds, I'll use it for small last-minute gap repairs. The rattle can sprays were a mixed bag. Like most people, I've used spray cans for a long time. The frosty finish I got during this build was something I never experienced before. Despite that, rattle cans are very handy to have around for various miscellaneous painting tasks. But for the main exterior paint scheme, you should definitely get an airbrush after your first few builds. Just keep in mind that learning to use an airbrush takes a fair amount of practice. Also, remember that setting up and cleaning the airbrush are extra tasks that add to your overall workload. Acrylic craft paints are a staple in all my builds, and I give them a 9. They are useful for quick, miscellaneous paint jobs when you don't want to set up your airbrush or use a rattle can. I also use them for all my washes. The Rust-Oleum Dead Flat Clear Coat was a pleasant surprise. I give it an 8. It was very easy to use, goes on smooth, and gives a pretty good flat finish with just a hint of shine. I will keep this handy for quick touch-ups when I just don't feel like setting up the airbrush and mixing a batch of Tamiya X21 with quick shine. The colored masking tape worked pretty good. I give it a 7. On the plus side, it was pretty easy to use and it looks pretty good from a distance. On the minus side, it looks pretty cheap when you get up close. But I can't think of any better options for beginners, especially if they don't have an airbrush. The makeup is a little tough to grade. On one hand, I don't think you can beat the value. I got these for $1.50 each at the Dollar Tree store, and it's very easy and convenient to use. The rust and the brown, to me, once you applied it, it looked like it had too much of a red undertone, so it didn't look natural on a warplane. The blacks and the grays worked better, and they were very effective in the weathering. Overall, I'd give this one a 5, and I'd give this one a 7 or 8. So I think it's probably a good thing for a beginner to try until you decide to get something better.